Hello and welcome to the next edition of the Hack the Planet podcast, where we say the more offensive the security tool, the nicer the tool developers. And we are joined today by the developer of some of the nicest tools, Josh Pitt, specifically the Backdoor Factory, SigThief, and Ebola, among others, but we definitely want to get into those. Say hello, Josh.
Hello, Josh. How's it going?
This is good. It's like say goodnight, Gracie. I haven't heard that one in a bit.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
We also have Mitchell.
Yo.
Say hello.
Howdy.
And we have a new Dan, another local hacker who's involved in the Golang rewrite of the Backdoor Factory, along with me. Say hello, new Dan.
Hey, gang.
Hey. And we're joined once more by Vyrus. Say hello, Vyrus. With some possible interjections from Vyrus Jr. It's an extraordinary pleasure to have you here. Although I feel a little bit like I want to say Bridget Fonda in Single White Female, because as I was thinking about this, I think I've actually spent about a year and a half of project time rewriting a lot of your tools, or porting a lot of your tools into Go.
Bless your heart. More likely.
This is somewhat at my influence.
Yeah. Well, so I mean, back in the day, I think it was like 2015 or so. I found myself sort of expressing frustration. I think how to get on some network to Vyrus, and he goes, "You fool! You haven't heard of the Backdoor Factory." And I was like, "What is the Backdoor Factory?" At the time, it was I think the best way to use it, in my opinion, anyway, was on a malicious wireless access point, because everyone's devices were still trying to connect to ATT Wi-Fi or whatever, and most people's downloads weren't signed in a way that was being checked. So you could get devices to associate to an access point and then man in the middle of their downloads and inject whatever shellcode you wanted, and it just worked out of the box. Dan's making the horns.
Yeah. I became aware of the Backdoor Factory because I used to follow Evil Grade, and Evil Grade was like a throwback to like the Zawinski era, like EtherTap days, and that was what you did. And then at some point, like more companies than Microsoft and Apple got wise to the whole signature sort of thing and started signing stuff. And that, I'm sure we'll get into that later. But like basically, if you wanted to backdoor an executable of some kind, like a formal executable, it was basically Venom was like the push button tool to do it, and Venom sucked balls at it. And with consultant gigs, because I was still consulting at the time, and then also with CCDC, Backdoor Factory was like this thing that like I couldn't figure out why other people hadn't heard of it. And I think it's just because like they didn't understand how it worked. And I was like, but you don't understand. Like you just take shellcode and you tell it to inject into everything, and you write a little Python, and everything is magic. Yeah.
I remember the first time I saw it, I actually saw Vyrus using it at the CCDC Nationals, and you're right. Like you had Veil and all these things, and they were so limited because you couldn't dynamically inject whatever you wanted in a backdoor, right? And you took the student services, the games, and then put our custom backdoors in them. And it was epic.
I had like an interpreter script where I could like run a command, and it would run an RC script that would like download the actual service they had to run for the game. It would backdoor it, re-upload it, kill the original process. And this would happen at scale. So this would happen on like 13, 14 different services in a matter of seconds on any one team. And I would be good. I'd be sitting there pretty with all these backdoors that like the kids just could not find or turn off. People would be like, what is this voodoo?
That is awesome. That's pretty awesome. Yeah, I mean, it was fun to write. A lot of late nights pre-kid. It was just once I figured out there was a need for it, I just kind of like, yeah, I can see where this goes, and yeah, I just continued to write code.
I got a question.
What was the origin story of that project? Because
was working at Booz Allen at the time, and I was doing red teaming, not red teaming. I was doing pen testing, and I was also defending the network, and I was also taking cracking the perimeter from offensive security, and that was one of the things in there. But you had to do it manually, and I was actually using it to show why we needed certain defenses on the networks where I was helping to do defense, and they thought like I would do it by hand, and they thought it was like black magic that you could, rewrite a, hook and entry point and have malicious code and everything works normally. And I was doing it manually, and I got pretty good. I could do it in like 15 minutes, which I thought was quick. Just to give me a binary, and I would do it manually in a hex editor. Maybe use p file to figure out where certain locations were, and I got tired of doing it manually, so I wrote a script, and I called it the Backdoor Factory, kind of as a troll, just because it was funny. And I ended up going to Nova Hackers. I was in Northern Virginia. I go to Nova Hackers to do a presentation on it, and Mubix was there, and and that was the same night that Belchek from Mandiant gave a presentation on APT1, which we may go into later on some other stuff. But yeah, it was kind of it was like March 2013, and I kind of figured at that point there was something to this code that would infect. It was basically a file infector. I mean, it's nothing. It wasn't a new concept. File infectors have been around a long time, back to like DOS days. But it was really fast and easy. It wasn't, it's not hard to do. So yeah, I mean that was when it came out, and then I was like, well, let's do ELF. Let's do the ELF format, because there really wasn't anything for ELF. I mean, it was the RGB. Is it RGB? Roy B V. I forgot. It was on a VX works, but or not
Roy
VX
G.
works. It was Roy G. Biff. Yeah, it was his ELF infector. And so I decided to use his technique and make a port for ELF, and then for Mako, there was the page zero method that didn't work anymore. So there were no techniques for a Mako format, and so I decided to find a new way to do it, and I used the blank space before all the code, before the sections would start, the executable sections would start. So yeah, I mean, we it's kind of the trifecta. You get all major formats, and next then after that came out BDF proxy, was just a BDF or Backdoor Factory plus man in the middle proxy. But yeah, that was it was pretty fun. It was pretty fun to write. It got a lot of it was kind of weird working with like Mutts, for NetHunter, I think was the OS that it was ported to. But yeah, it was fun. It was a fun project.
I remember NetHunter. That was that like Linux distro you could run on your Android phone.
Yes.
Yeah.
On your Android 100.
I have it
I
right
forgot
here.
about that.
This is
yeah.
This is a OnePlus that I still use to test Android apps because it has no protections whatsoever.
I have a 1+1 that has NetHunter on it myself.
Yeah.
That's totally.
Yeah.
I forgot all about the Kali, right? That was the mobile distro of Kali.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was
Back before it was Kali, it was still man, what was it? What was Kali?
Whole name. Oh, it's the tip of my tongue. Backtrack.
Backtrack. Before it was Backtrack, it was something else actually.
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
So I think I actually owe you. So when I've been talking about the rewrite of the Backdoor Factory, I've been talking about the different injection methods, that were in there, and I actually had no idea that you invented the Mako injection method. So I've taken to calling that. I couldn't find any documentation on it anywhere, but I've learned from talking to VXers that if you attribute something to the wrong person, it's like a big deal with them. I think attribution is very important in that community. So So I've taken to calling that the one true code cave method for Mach-O, just because there is just this one giant code cave that seems to be in every Mach-O file after the headers and before the first load segment.
It's massive.
And there's like nowhere else in the file to go. You know?
There's actually a little bit of prior art on that, and I've never seen it referenced anywhere else. But there's an Italian guy who used to work under Dino Daizovi before he had left Trail of Bits, and he gave a Black Hat talk in 2015 that was about some OSX code caving work, and it was very closely related to the research that Dino was doing at the time prior to the Mac Hacker's Handbook of reverse engineering the kernel-based hardware-tied RPC service that lives inside OSX. And that, quite frankly, other than Pitz's work, is like the only other place I've seen anybody produce tangible results with Mach-O code caving.
What year was this?
I want to say 2015, maybe 2014 was a Black Hat thing. I don't know if I have the talk. I don't know if the talk has been posted publicly, but I know the slides are public.
Yeah, there might have been prior work. I mean, it's just so obvious when you look at it. If you're trying to accomplish something, I wouldn't be surprised.
It's different than yours, though. Like it was an interesting approach, but it was more limited than the approach that you used.
Right. Yeah.
Well, we're close to the topic of code caving. I noticed one of the features that we didn't port from your original code was the code cave chaining stuff for PE files on Windows, which was really, really slick. Basically, it would look for little sections of zeros that weren't big enough to hold the shellcode itself, chop the shellcode into chunks that would fit in the little sections, and then add jumps from section to section. So it would like lily pad, across all the little code caves. And based on my cursory research, I kind of decided that PE files seem to be more packed these days than they were back then. You don't see as many code caves. The other thing is that the shell code I'm typically injecting these days is much bigger.
Yeah, that can be a problem. Yeah. There's so what I saw a couple years ago when I was still really doing this was X the hex 0xcc. You see large blocks of that. So I was seeing larger blocks of just 0xcc throughout the executable, and that may be something to look at. That's something I'm going to be looking at in the future.
Is that like the debug padding symbol?
It is, but it's
hardware debug. Yeah.
Yeah, but you see large portions of it on certain executables.
Interesting.
I think that's a maybe not a full release build, but it's something to look for because it's definitely there, and it's something I wrote notes on about looking at it.
That's interesting. So in our port, the only thing we have working now for PE is the add new section method, but that seems to work pretty reliably.
Yeah, no, it's a good section. It's so whenever I first released the import address table methods of shellcode that I wrote, no one detected it. Like no one. It was great. Like I think F-Secure was the first vendor to detect it, but I knew how they detected it, and it was a simple read, write, execute section, right? Because I also had the script that would clean up your code after the fact, right? It would go through and zero out the sections that that just executed, and the issue is that they just go through and look for a read, write, execute section, which is not normal in the PE format on a regular binary. You'll have read execute, but you won't have read write execute. And so that's one of the things they look for. They also look for the text section CRC32, the compile flag that basically says this is what the CRC is for the binary. I think it's just a text section, but yeah, they also look for that too. There's some of the Chinese, like I think some of the Chinese ones look at that. Chinese AVs. So
Does the CRC, do they actually do the CRC calculation on the file, or do they just look at the CRC to see if it's what they expect?
it's I think they do it on the file.
But it's just a CRC?
It's a CRC, yeah. It's not hard to calculate. It's pretty
Yeah.
quick. It's just on the. I think it's on the text section. I could be wrong, but it's been a while. But those are the two main ways you can detect the backdoor factory.
It's also interesting that the like Windows PEs or whatever will run with those checksums being off. You know, like that seems pretty forgiving.
Loader don't care.
Yeah.
I mean, it's an operating system made to run JIT code. I mean, it's amazing. Like it's like I don't think we'll ever get away from, being able to execute code in weird ways on Windows. It's just not going to happen. I mean, there's too many ways of getting code to execute. It's made to execute code. I mean, it's the whole point.
Starting with DCOM.
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, even Windows Defender definitions are packaged in PE formats that if you add an entry point to, they execute.
Oh no.
Yeah, that's a thing.
But everything's signed now, right? So
Yeah, everything's signed.
that's all fine.
Yeah.
So so nobody has any use for the backdoor factor anymore.
No, it's good.
The end.
Until somebody adds the signature to your local trust store. Their signature.
Yeah.
That or I remember
$90 is a lot of money.
Well, it's 300 if you want the driver cert.
Or one of my favorite things to do is to download an AV and then bin walk everything that it's running and look for signing certs. Like you find even if it's not valid, like it's self-signed, it still has the name of the corporation in the cert, and you can use it to sign PEs. There are several major AV vendors that have this problem.
Well, and speaking of signatures, you have a bit of experience in bypassing just the signature mechanisms itself.
Yeah, there's on Mac. That was 2 years ago now. I was on parental leave because I just had my second kid. My wife had the second kid. I caught it. So I'm on parental leave, and
Still the best DM thread I've gotten by.
yes. Yeah, I'm just can't sleep. Kids, try like just up at all hours, and I'm like, well, I'm going to take a look at this Maco code signing thing I had problems with a couple years ago, and not problems with. It was just a weird error message. If you threw a byte in between a FAT file, so you had two architectures. You had like x86 and x64. You just threw a byte in there, code sign through a fit. It's like something's wrong here. I'm like, well, I'm going to look at this because there's definitely some kind of runtime error in how it's doing something. And so, I figured out that if you had the first binary in the FAT file that was signed by Apple, the second one wasn't signed, but it was the proper chipset for the machine that you were on, and the first one wasn't the proper chipset. So let's say you got PPC, and the second binary is x86 or x64, and you're on a 64-bit machine, then it's just going to check the signature of the first file and run the second file, and you get a code bypass or a signing bypass, and that and it wasn't Apple's fault. They blamed all the developers, which was hilarious. They said they've implemented code sign checks wrong, and then they updated their documentation that you need to check every file in the FAT file format, and and with this new chipset that Apple's introducing, this should be fun. Hopefully they do it right.
I seem to remember a certain EDR vendor that had you run a bunch of payloads through a thing. I don't know if we can talk about that, but
yeah,
that was amazing.
I'm sure.
Actually, kind of funny. I don't know if any of you seen this. A similar tactic exists now for artificial dynamic code loading on OS X, where it turns out basically you can trigger the loader to load an independent copy of a signed established dilib, and it will actually load another copy of it in memory. It does not do the Windows thing where it does the whole check and then does a name comparison and just points to the one that's already existing in memory. So it'll load a separate copy of it, and it does this in an attempt to preserve the sandboxing that Apple has tried to implement over the last few years. But there is a step in between the loading of that library and the utilization of that library where you can then open the memory space of the dynamically loaded library and modify it. So there's code public now where you can load a signed dilib, then hollow out the dilib and fill it with your own code, and then resume thread essentially, and put whatever you want in there, and they'll totally show up as signed and all good.
That's beautiful.
There's a new one for Windows too. That it's kind of like MIME sniffing with jars and like signed exes. So it's like if you have a validly signed exe file, but you give it a jar extension and append a malicious jar file off the end of it or something like that.
In reverse order. It's like reverse order is the jar, and then the top order is the L or the PE.
Yeah, and it plays off the different tools and how they decide what a file is. Because a jar file is a zip file, and the magic number for a zip file is at the end, essentially where the compression table is. And the way like the system verifies a PE signature is it starts from the beginning, looks at the magic number, sees it's a PE, and then skips ahead to where the PE header tells it the certificate or the signature is going to be, and it doesn't look at anything after it. Right. So there's a new attack that plays off this confusion about whether something is an exe file or signed or not, or a jar file that apparently lets you do some stuff.
That's beautiful.
So didn't you have something like that for? Wasn't there something like that for Windows also? How did the SigThief attack work?
Oh man, no. SigThief is just it's literally ripping a signature at the end of a file, fixing up the PE header and of another file, and putting the signature that you stole from the first file on the second file. And of course, it's going to fail, right? But it should fail. It'll fail on Windows, but it doesn't fail for certain EDRs or antiviruses. Like there's, I was looking at Avast. I was reverse engineering their signatures, and I saw in the logic that it gave Windows signed binaries if they had the what's it called, the OIN, not OIN, it's the
OID, those GUID things.
Yeah, it just said it recognizes the unique Microsoft signature like value for its private key, I think. So for its public key, sorry. So what it does, if it sees this unique string in the signature or in the signing on the end of the executable, it will give it a pass. It says okay. I was like, well, I'm just going to take one off of. I'm just going to rip a valid signature off of any of these tools that are on the Windows or any executable, and put it on this piece of malware, and sure enough, like Avast is like, it's good, so. And I was like, well, I might as well release this because this is hilarious, and I'm sure many EDRs or antiviruses, whatever you want to call them, have that issue, or did.
And then you can take that signature, like let's say you clone a cert on the box, you can clone that whole trust chain, and obviously it's not the original trusted signed cert, but it's the exact clone, and then you just install that in the local trust cert. So like if it's an analyst on the box looking at everything's valid and signed, and now they have to ask like, well, which one of these is actually the valid Microsoft root, which you can find out. But I just love that because like most analysts aren't going to do that analysis. They're going to look at something, they're like, oh, that's valid signed for that box, I'm out of here.
Yeah, that's great.
If you get to a certain point on a box, you can add a something to the trusted root on Windows and on Linux. On OS X, there's some weird. They draw this weird distinction between the system CA roots and the user CA roots.
Mhm.
And there seems to be some extra protection there. Like, I don't even think you can add something to the system root as a user normally.
You're not supposed to be able to, because some of the chunks of OS X update code that update microcontrollers on your hardware use the same signature to do validation and update process. Because I know that's how some of the UEFI stuff works, and so that's why like they don't give access to that to quote unquote the user.
Of course, historically speaking, it's like we're really just talking about whether or not you have an Authenticode cert for the most part for Windows, because that gets you into the PPL kind of protected process land, and you could potentially buy or find or inherit one of those somehow.
If you go back to the Mac trust for a minute, they're actually kicking everybody out of the kernel now. So like you can't even sign kernel modules or anything. So like the computing environment's getting like extremely locked down. It's kind of
Yeah, well,
Which
with Mac,
companies like Logitech didn't exist, but they do. So
yeah. With Mac though, they expose like the Thunderbolt to the outside of the box, and then it's like how you get access to that for DMA is basically you pay them some money to get to become an official Apple accessory or whatever, and then you get your driver signed and you can do DMA stuff, at least in theory.
Yeah, no, it's crazy. Like once you get into the ecosystem, like the whole Apple push notification thing, like you get crazy access and you can send people, ridiculous stuff, but you have to like buy into their system.
well, part of the reason I pulled out Logitech is because at work right now we're actually doing a lot of chasing of we have some detections around CH mods and kernel modules, right? Because like at a typical corporate shop, you don't have people CH modding a lot of code and then loading it as a kernel module. That's not considered a common thing. And so we've caught some bad activity with stuff doing it, but it also turns out that the way that it is extremely common, it is extremely common to have a Logitech camera, mouse, microphone that needs to be CH modded before it can be loaded, that they distribute as a binary object and don't individually sign. This is like the vast majority of our not shady, it was just a user traffic, and it's very common. And other vendors are actually starting to follow suit because of the security center lockdowns that are happening, because all of a sudden there are kernel elements that they don't have access to anymore unless they want to write a kernel driver. And if they have to refactor a bunch of their code versus writing a kernel driver, the kernel driver path is actually more documented than trying to do it the other way, than going through layers upon layers of Apple framework, especially if you're distributing for multiple operating systems. So you don't want to heavily invest on one platform versus another.
If we want to take a turn through Linux land, since we've already talked about Windows and OS X a bit, in Linux, it's you tend to see more sort of Linux servers, and you tend to see people setting up their own artifact repositories in the cloud, having their own signing keys sitting somewhere off their CI/CD maybe.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot more situations, I think, in Linux land where you might just find the signing key you want lying around somewhere. And then, if you can man in the middle binaries and inject whatever you want, you could potentially own everything else the next package update. And, fun fact, while I was looking into this, so I've been planning on adding RPM support to the Backdoor Factory rewrite, because the one thing we added as a new feature is the ability to unpack archives, inject shellcode into binaries inside the archive, and then repack the archive. That's like the only kind of innovation in the rewrite. But
So, I think the BDF proxy supported that itself.
Oh, it's possible, but I got to be honest. I didn't read all of the BDF proxy code.
No, yeah, you
well,
could
so
do. I think it could do zip and 7-zip. Oh, kind of the same. But yeah, I think it could do it. It's been a while since I looked at it, but it wasn't in BDF itself. That it wasn't part of the main.
But looking into RPM, I found out that CentOS 5 had a bug where it just did no signature validation on RPMs at all. So if you do happen to come across any CentOS 5, maybe as a top of rack unit or something that has to be installed by hand, you might still find it. But that would be woefully outdated. But I do think, getting a signing key from a CI/CD is not outside the realm of possibility. And this would only be if people were had like GPG signature checking actually enabled, and a lot of repositories might have that off, quote unquote temporarily, while they get binary signing working.
Yeah,
So
that's a good point.
But yeah, when we were looking at the Backdoor Factory to kind of break it up, you had so many thousands of lines of code that did all kinds of different things. We sort of conceptually divided it into sort of different modules, right? So we broke it up well, the real problem was you were just using the PE file library in Python, and we didn't have anything in Go that did the same thing. So we actually had to go and fork a Go standard library and add a bunch of stuff to it for PE files and Mako and ELF to kind of match some of the stuff you were getting. Well, for some of the other file formats, I think you had a lot more custom code. But so missing PE file was part of it. But then for the BDF proxy part, the part that was actually intercepting the web downloads, we basically just used BetterCap, and BetterCap just magically handles all of that for us.
Yes.
So it was just a situation of BetterCap solved that problem, so I didn't have to go back and look at what you did.
Yeah, that's great.
Oh, and BetterCap happens to be written in Go.
Yeah, it's a perfect match. That's good. That's good.
I was going to mention, Ben, that that was such an awesome aha moment when you were like, wait, let's use this existing library that already has these structures well defined, the Golang debug thing. And then I remember when we started digging into it, it's like even that was only half done. You know what I mean? Like they parse half the binary, but they could never put it back together. Like there was so much just code there, or just bytes that they copied wholesale.
But it's really cool now that we did that because it's really enabling a lot of really interesting kind of work in Go in a sort of interesting way. There's this project that was just released that I was kind of hinting at in the last episode, which is a Go implementation of Hell's Gate. But it takes it a little bit further than that. But it lets you, from the perspective of Go code, when injected into a process on Windows, it can look at all of the images, the libraries that are loaded in memory, using this debug library we wrote as part of the Backdoor Factory port. It parses itself in memory, walks its own table of loaded images, walks all of the symbols in all of those images, and using the make win syscall thing that comes as part of the syscall package in Go, with a slight modification, can spin up easy to call Go functions to make direct calls to all of the syscalls that can be Hell's gated. So it won't go through load library. It won't load another copy of NTDLL from disk. It just goes straight to where NTDLL is in memory, sniffs the function header a little bit to get the syscall ID, sets up its own stack frame, and then just directly calls the syscall. And it can do that for all of the syscalls that can be Hell's gated, which is what that method is. But for all of the other calls, the regular system calls, with a slight modification to make win syscall, you can call into those the same way, directly, loaderless, right?
Yeah, that's pretty slick.
At the moment, it's everything in NTDLL, everything in kernel 32 is exposed, and you can do some really interesting stuff with that. You can get the list of processes. You can you can do a lot of stuff. But I don't know. It's just nice having kind of sort of the component working allows a lot of other interesting stuff.
When you say Hell's Gate is the jump from 64-bit to x86. Is that what you mean?
No, Hell's Gate was a thing. I think it just came out a couple months ago. Basically, it's this trick for there are system calls in Windows that have thin wrappers in NTDLL.
Okay.
And so it's like 64-bit into the 64-bit kernel.
Okay, because no, I'm thinking Heaven's Gate.
Yeah, Heaven's Gate.
Yeah, Heaven's Gate. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so they're all
Go ahead.
all of these things are like plays on the same thing. So there's like another gate someone linked me to earlier that was like Heresy's Gate, which is similar but slightly different. And it's like I think they all read some Dante book I didn't have to read in high school or something. I feel like this is a reference to something I didn't read.
So if we're in user land, is that just purgatory, or is that like non-admin's purgatory?
It feels like it. That's all I can
I
say.
gotta break out of purgatory, guys.
I believe I've seen a package called Purgatory somewhere.
I'm sure there's something.
Yeah, I don't remember what it is.
Yeah, Hell's Gate is just a reference to this trick of looking at the entry point and not jumping to it, but just looking at where the syscall ID is and then stealing that, setting up your own stack frame and jumping in.
Okay.
Got it. But basically, it avoids all calls to load library and all calls to get proc by name or whatever it's called. Yeah, get proc adder. But you can just directly call all of the things you're allowed to do from the kernel. So it's just for evasion.
Actually, as a side note, one of the things I've noticed is that trick actually makes, like, there's a lot of EDR that attaches to get async key state now, because that's pretty much how all the keyloggers work. Like, that's how Empire, that's how Metasploit, that's how Cobalt Strike, that's how all the bullshit keyloggers work. And it works. It's very loud. It's very computationally expensive. But, like, nothing, for a while, nothing caught it. And then at some point, people figured out, like, wait, no one else calls that function for every key on the keyboard. And so that's a very common detector now. Turns out, like, routing that call through Hell's Gate makes all the EDR not work. Like, almost all.
Yeah, there's a lot of similar things that you can do. It's like if you do it through if you don't do it through Hell's Gate, EDR catches it. But then if you just convert everything to Hell's Gate, it doesn't get caught anymore. And the cool thing about Banana Phone is that it just kind of gives you this abstraction layer that kind of just handles that for you. And the code you're writing, looks no different than it would if you were just making the direct calls. It's kind of a neat trick.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Well, we talked about SigThief, and we talked about the Backdoor Factory a bit. So the other thing I wanted on my must-mention list of Josh Pitt's projects is ebowla.
I was going to say, speaking of EDR, EDR evasion most specifically.
ebowla is a very foreboding name.
It's with a W first off.
It's ebol with a W.
With a W.
OLA.
Also, I think the project predated the second, more recent Ebola outbreak.
It did.
Yeah.
I felt honored when I saw this project hit open source because he was. Well, I'll let Josh tell the story. But.
Well, yeah, so obviously Vyrus's was it your memory module? I think it was his memory module code. We used that. In the project.
It was the original Mimikatz implementation, which I didn't write memory module. Memory module's been around for a while, but
right. But you wrote the link for using it in Golang, and it's phenomenal.
Well, that was part of the original Go Mimikatz project.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Arguably some of the first process injection in Go, right? Like that was some of the first examples I saw with the Go Mimikatz stuff.
Yeah.
I've only seen other examples that were not ready to go. They were libified and Chinese, but nothing that was prepackaged.
Yeah, that was kind of fun. We were at Travis Morrow, myself, we're at a work conference for our company, and we just we're just brainstorming, and I was messing around with basically a book cipher, taking if you were to have an encoder that would encode based on the bytes and location offset within a binary, and recompile it, or not recompile it, but put it back together in memory somewhere else, execute it. I was like, let's write something with this. Let's do something with this. And then we got into the idea of, doing environmental keying. We're like, let's write it in Go. We've never written anything in Go, like let's do this, and we did that. Yeah, it was fun. I mean, we presented it at Infiltrate 2016, and Kaspersky wrote a signature for it. I don't know if you guys know this, but they wrote a signature for it, and their signature was bad. They had a bad signature. So what you do is Google Kaspersky and ebowla with a W, and you will laugh for about an hour because it started flagging every Golang Windows binary ever produced if it was on a Kaspersky protected system. Kaspersky actually had to walk the signature back, eating ETH wallets apparently. I don't know how. I don't know how
because
much.
Go Ethereum.
Yeah, and
That
I
was
don't
the
know
main
how
one.
much. Yeah, it was. Sorry if someone. Not my fault. I didn't write the signature. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was. It's pretty funny. I know the guy that wrote the signature. I know the guy that wrote the signature, and I saw him at Black Hat because it happened right before Black Hat, and I'm like, well, you kind of messed up on that. And he's like, yeah. I will not say his name, but yeah, it was quite funny.
Well, what's
But-
funny is like the loader influence from the memory module stuff. There were a couple of EDRs that tried to write signatures for that after it kind of got popular because like we met at DriveCon and then ebowla happened and that kind of popularized the technique. And I did see a couple of things kind of prop up with like Bitcoin links and like clearly on the darker gray side of the ecosystem. And I saw some EDRs try to write signatures for it. And I know there was a thing for a while where like I think it was like the Cloudflare base agent was getting flagged for a while by like even their own tooling and like Mandiant's endpoint protection because people tried to write signatures for memory module. And the whole reason I started with memory module is because memory module is actually how Pi to exe works.
Yep.
And there are all kinds of commercial tools that use Pi to exe. So in trying to write that signature, they ended up signaturing more of Go runtime for the version that was compiled at that time than they did actual memory module. And they were all kind of like, I'm trying to think, there was like a whole bunch of like benign cloud administration tools that just broke outright. Like EDR would just mess with it. There was like, oh man, there
probably die. That's Go. Docker. Docker would probably die. That's Go.
I saw some GCP stuff that died. There was some Cloudflare endpoint stuff that died. There was like a TunnelBlick adapter that some group was running that was like a private VPN that like all of a sudden had problems. There was like a handful of them.
It always comes back to Pi to exe. It's like once they had to whitelist Pi to exe, it was just the end of any antivirus ever working ever. But they figured at the time that we have to whitelist Pi to exe because it's the new jar to exe, which was basically responsible for the whole previous era of like whitelisted malware, basically. Oh man.
Just really quickly.
And then it just came, and then Pi to exe like carried it forward into the future via memory module. It's just incredible.
I looked up this article, and yeah, like the Kaspersky thing eats the entire Golang toolchain. Like, just eats every part of it. Like the compiler, like pretty great.
There's a GitHub. Is it the GitHub? Like the issue. There's a Golang GitHub issue. And they reference ebowla directly.
Yeah, exactly.
The signature was ebowla. It was hilarious. Kaspersky's signature was so specific. It was like ebowla.
Yeah, I'm looking at the Kaspersky forum. This guy's like, it just ate my whole tool chain. And it's like clearly the Go compiler, and then it's labeled Ebola. It's hilarious. I also wanted to mention, I forgot, we were inspired by Ebola to do the environmental keying in GScript. Like, I completely forgot. That was a huge inspiration.
Well, as I remember correctly, it was a Stuxnet copy, right? It was a similar thing to what Stuxnet used.
Yep, very similar. Stuxnet used MD5, I think. We took it out to a book sniffer for the deployment. Yeah, there were different things that we used, but yeah, it was Stuxnet. No, it wasn't Stuxnet. No, it was
The
Gauss.
Vault 7 stuff.
That's right. Gauze.
Yeah.
Gauze.
Yeah, Gauze. I can't pronounce it, but yeah. Yeah, it was the one where, Kaspersky's like, hey, we need help with this. Does anybody know anything? And I was like, oh, this would be fun to do. Yeah, that was fun.
Yeah, that was cool. That was the one that was like, it was like a folder that would write itself like 200 times, and it would use a hash of the folder names or something, right? It was like an MD5. Yep. It was like 200 folders, and each folder was an MD5 hash. It was like a hash of 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 a hash. Like, yeah.
It's like, good luck.
And like Flame did something like that too, right? Where it would like
it would so Flame would take, if I remember correctly, it would take your UUID off your Mac, ship it back to the server. It would take the UUID of like your Mac address or whatever, and then it would ship it back to the server, and then it would encode the payload to that UUID, ship it back down, and then it would decode it on the fly. But I mean, the reason Flame got caught, it was just because it was infecting everything, right?
Yeah,
not everything, but a lot. Yeah,
it was really big and really fast. I mean, I used a similar tactic at CCDC for a while after Ebola was public, where it would like basically it would profile a process it was going to inject to, and it would take a chunk of the stack header and then farm that back, and then it would use that as a key into just this existing Ebola Python code. And then it would pack like an MSF loader and then send that up and then dynamically inject that into the load space.
I never used Ebola myself directly, but if I understand the principle correctly, it hashes, it looks at some files it expects to see in the environment, calculates the hash of those, and then uses that as an encryption, like does some derivation to get the key to decrypt the rest of its payload. Is that about right?
Yep.
So I guess what I'm curious about is what are the most interesting or the most useful things to actually hash in order to sort of target a specific box, right?
So if you know the domain, I think so. One way I would use environmental keying if I were doing a red team against a distributed organization that's not in a office right now, like we all are, is and they're a Windows environment, for example, I would use I would look at the domain name if they're on AD, right? I would do that, and so that if you're doing any kind of testing, you will get a computer. You'll get the computer that you want, not the computer you don't want, because I mean, how many times have you deployed USB devices and they end up on machines that aren't part of your corporate network? They leave the building, they go somewhere else. I've had that happen before. So you could use environmental keying to stay within an enclave, a logical enclave, which is actually a good use case.
Yes, see our previous episode on protester technology if you want an example of getting the wrong machines.
I've used it at a CCDC before because like a lot of times like Vyrus can testify, we create like really nasty local stuff that isn't going to call back and it'll just like eviscerate a machine. So I've used it with timestamps so that way like people can't use this after the competition.
I like that.
That's cool. I'm into that.
Yeah, I think it came back to bite me though once because I remember like Taylor was like, "Yo, let me get that binary," and I was like, "It's not gonna run."
Just set your like it's some shareware.
We've had there's been a fraught kind of sub-history of Nationals CCDC Red Team of quote unquote tools escaping the environment and the problems therein.
Whoops.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Not the right words anymore.
Yeah. We're not.
I mean, sure.
That's entirely Mubix's fault, by the way.
I'm sure.
But keeping red team tools to a specific group of people is so easy. It's a solved problem. Why don't we just do it?
Well,
Nice segue.
Yes.
So
a great topic.
No, we're getting into this right now.
Okay.
So as part of my hey, I have a Backdoor Factory rewrite. A friend of mine was going to give a talk at SummerCon and had a conflict, so I I stepped in for him and gave this presentation, and it's literally just, what was the old tool, why did I want to rewrite it, how we rewrote it, and then most of it was like how to set it up and actually run it. But at the end of the talk, and I think it was very well received. But at the end of the talk, someone goes on the Q&A channel, because it's a Zoom call, right? It's a virtual conference. Someone goes on the Q&A channel and starts in with, "Why would anyone ever create such a thing? This can only be misused." And Mark, the guy who was emceeing SummerCon, just was immediately on top of it. He just went, "Look, the value of offensive security tools has already been well established in other places. It's like we can just move on and like next question." And I was like, "Oh, I actually wanted to answer that." So I want to talk about what you guys think about the Twitter debate. I don't know if I'd call it any other kind of debate, but the Twitter debate about the value of offensive security tools, whether or not you could put genies back in bottles.
The yelling into the ether and hoping someone's listening.
Yeah.
I mean, also known as like the arms dealing conversation has been going on since humans have been humans, and we haven't solved it yet. So why the hell InfoSec thought leaders think they're going to solve it is fucking beyond me.
I mean, we place a lot of emphasis on what we do as being really important, which is hilarious. My dad was an aerospace engineer and made real weapons, like the Bunker Buster. I don't know if anyone heard of that. He helped design that and other things, and that's part of my background is like I was around that growing up, seeing these things being developed. Like I'd go to Christmas parties and they were like, "Oh, look, we took the Bunker Buster and ran it down a track and it went through like 200 feet of concrete. Isn't that awesome?" I'm like, "Oh, that's pretty cool." I'm 8. But we it's kind of funny because like going back to the cyber, I got a drink now. I don't have anything. The offensive tools thing. It's clearly the people that are most upset either can't use the MITRE ATT&CK framework because that's a competing framework for their firm, I think, or they just do not. They have too much skin in the game on the defensive side, and their product sucks. I mean, they just have snake oil. That's the way I see it. I mean, if they can't detect an open source tool, how are you going to detect something that a actual advanced adversary is building on their own? I mean, clearly, I have problems when. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, but everyone says, "Oh, it's so expensive to write new malware."
It's not.
I know. It's like
a bunch of talented people do it for free at a college competition.
Isn't most actual malware still Delphi code from the 90s?
Oh God.
Just recrypted every so often.
Not as much anymore. Actually, there's a lot of go.
Poison Ivy.
There's a lot of go.
Poison Ivy.
Poison Ivy, Dark Comet, like all, but actually there's a lot of go in a lot of the new ransomware stuff there's a lot of go.
You guys aren't wrong though. It's a lot of go, but it's a lot of the same techniques, just repackaged, recrypted, re-implemented, Yeah.
Because that still works.
I think there was a rumor, I don't know if this is true or not, about the origins of McAfee, as a company, about whether or not maybe they wrote a bunch of viruses to justify selling an antivirus, essentially.
I've heard this rumor.
I don't know if he was smart enough.
I
mean, maybe some of the people we worked with, I mean, he's smart enough to say, "Hey, you write some malware so we can write signatures for it." I mean, I could see that.
From people who were around in the day in New York, because he was originally from the New York scene back in the day, from like old school BBSers, was very much like he was the crazy guy who would somehow get an invite to the things, and people would be like, "Why is that guy here?" And every once in a while, he'd leave with one or two smart people and like convince them to write some shit. So. Considering how crazy he is, like, I don't know. It seems like a plausible story to me.
I think about that story fondly because there's this built-in balance in it between the virus creator and the virus detection, right? And that's totally, when I look at the world today, it's just like completely there's no balance, right? Like EDR has been doing more or less the same stuff antivirus has been doing for decades, and and then failing to work against the same techniques that the attackers have been using more or less for decades, with very slow, almost glacial progress on both sides. You know,
Well, clearly
and
they just need another EDR.
yeah, right.
We just need a new one. I mean, what is Virus total up to now? Like 60 or something? 65? I don't even know. I mean, I haven't looked at it in a while.
But now there's the other one. What is it? Something else total, not passive total. There's like another.
Oh,
There's another one.
yeah.
The one that definitely doesn't keep all of your data. Really, we mean it this time.
The one that flat out does business in Bitcoin, and you can make like detectors and sell them anonymously because like
That seems legit.
It's a weird way of monetizing. I don't know.
I did want to get back to the debate, and I do want to represent the other side like a little bit because I think it's
Yeah, it's
fair
fair.
to hear their argument. And the argument is that releasing these tools enables the attackers, it reduces their cost to market, and it disappropriately affects the people without any security. Like the mom and pop shops are going to get hit with these advanced tools. They're not going to have these advanced EDRs, and they're going to lose. And I think, and then the crux of the argument is they want to introduce, and I'm not going to it's not sanctioned specifically, but they want to control the scene so there's not this unrestricted release. You know what I mean? And I think there's so many good points to dig into that. Like one of the first ones is what we've already talked about, which is that these groups, like our groups, are already practicing restricted release. We're already taking these measures. The difference is it's the internet, and there's a ton of shit you can't control, and it's going to get out there anyway. So that's why you have things like MITRE ATT&CK, where they're saying, all right, if this is getting out there, if this is on the forums, we need to understand this and break down these techniques. What is this malware doing very specifically? And then democratizing that, giving that to everybody so that these mom and pops can protect themselves. But that's such a nuanced conversation. You know what I mean? There's so many parts to that.
So go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say my controlled release method is just I put code on GitHub without a lot of documentation, and I figure no one ever gives me any trouble about it, right? Because they don't, unless they can read code, they don't know what it is. So it's fine. It's public and no one cares.
As some of you might know, I'm working on a newer version of the Python version of BDF. You guys know this, right?
I saw your Twitter post about it. I was going to ask.
Yes. So in the default state for that version is going to be the ECAR or ICAR of file infectors. If you don't know what you're doing, it's going to output a file that's detected by, it's going to patch in a way that's detected by every EDR AV known to man or woman or thing. The way that's going to work is pretty simple. Just keep iterating until you get detected. You're going to have to bypass detections, you're going to have to read something or know something. Read the manual, and then you'll understand how it works, and you'll be able to use it. So that's how I'm trying to help with that for the next release. I mean, going back to the debate, having these tools out there also helps people understand what is possible, right? Like before BDF proxy, everything was HTTPS. Everything. I mean, sorry, HTTP. Everything was clear text. All down. Like sysinternals was clear text. And I was trolling Rasanovich. Is it Rasanovich? I think he wrote him. I was trolling him on Twitter. I was like, why are these, why are these, clear text? He goes, well, they're signed. Well, I was like, well, BDF unsigns them. So you can't check the signature, and then I added signature signing, and then you could, sign it with whatever you wanted. And then they decided to add TLS, and then there was a downgrade attack. You could downgrade it to clear text. And so finally now, 3 years ago, they actually made it, fully TLS. But yeah, there's definitely
now you
sorry?
can. Well, I said which is great because now you can dynamically load them, and Windows won't complain because they're signed.
Exactly.
That's
exact.
a brilliant point, though, because you bring up this life cycle where offensive tool developers are like, here's where the fallacies of the product still exist, right? Like here's where it's not working. and they do listen. Like it takes a while, and I guess there's like an
So-
incentive, but they listen.
You were talking about the mom and pop shops that are affected by the GitHub proof of concept attacks. I would just like to point out that one of the mom and pop shops on that list is the government of Australia, which is going through a bit of a crisis right now over what they're calling the copy paste attacks, where their government was widely compromised left and right. So they had to call in some security consultants who have written up a very nice report I will include in the links of this episode, where they describe like all of the tools that were used, and point out that almost all of it is unmodified proof of concept code from GitHub. So the media has been calling it the copy paste attacks in Australia, but that's one of the guys that I sort of work on projects with lives down there. And it created sort of a momentary chilling effect on people who are working on tool development, just because that's a government that has previously expressed an interest in internet censorship and video game censorship back in the 90s. There was a rather famous incident where they wouldn't allow the Sierra Online game Phantasmagoria into the country. Which is like Sierra Online.
A lot of people probably don't remember that, like, there was a reference to that in the original XXX movie.
Yeah.
Like, the opening sequence is before he jumps off the bridge. Like, the target is this guy who is a real politician. They took the name of a real politician who was citing Australia in their legislation, being like, we should ban violent video games. And Vin Diesel looking into the camera, being like, "Come on, man, that's the only education we got," and then jumping off a bridge and like crashing his car.
One of the dangers of this debate, potentially, is that when Australia gets a report like this, oh, we got owned from copy paste stuff from GitHub, right? They could take this one of two ways. They could decide, hey, we should do like an authoritarian crackdown on anyone who's trying to disseminate information about offensive tools, which is something they've shown a predisposition for in the past, to be honest. And or they could say, hey, we should fix our shit, maybe, right? Like,
Yeah.
when people look at this report and laugh, maybe we should try to run faster than the next guy.
I kind of always
Right.
thought this argument is like a long tailed version of the old argument of like the criticisms of the early versions of InfoSec, right? Like when it was still mostly hacking and not InfoSec, it wasn't really an industry yet. It was still kind of fledgling. There were these early detractors, and a lot of them are kind of running the game right now. But there were these early
Hack shaming.
yeah, but there were these early detractors who were very much like, if you aren't making a class out of it, then you're not helping, and everyone should be helping. And that was and it was very much based on the idea that like just putting the material out there doesn't make it accessible to people who aren't good enough to understand it by just reading the code, and that makes it not good enough for the general populace, and therefore they wanted to put this kind of social responsibility on anyone who is doing any kind of research to be a teacher. It was, you need to be this pillar of subjectively externalized ethical responsibility where other people, like your whole mantra needs to be devoted to teaching other people this thing that you figured out, because just putting the code out there isn't good enough. It's black magic, and you need to de-blackify it as like a thing. And I don't know, like that. I see that kind of rear its ugly head every time I hear this logic where it's like, well, we could just be authoritarian about making people that know how to do this stuff only do it the way that we want them to. Or we could just acknowledge that we don't know what the hell we're doing. And we can go people that know.
The German government tried to pass a law banning, hacker tools at one point, and everyone laughed and ignored it, and nothing's happened. Because the fact of the matter is, it's a fake debate. There's no way you can pass an enforceable rule.
Right.
Full stop. And even if there was, right? Even if there was some way to stop the dissemination of information on this, like, international digital information sharing network where we can do arbitrary amounts of encryption, good luck, I guess. I don't know what to tell you. It's not going to work, right?
So
There's no budget that will solve the problem.
Well, there is a way to slow it down. You're familiar with bug bounties, right? And I dipped my toe in that. If we want to talk about that, my experience with that, but they could, people could pay for techniques. I'm not saying, like let's say you're going to write the next some C2 framework that's not using techniques that no one knows about yet. A vendor that might be interested in that might pay for it to corner the market so that it's not released. I mean, that could be a thing.
That's like the exploit pack model, right?
Yeah. Right.
Like where some companies were selling exploit packs, that you could use with a Metasploit or whatever that would have like unreleased exploits instead of releasing them. And that actually was a really big deal before like ZDI took off and started trying to make a clearinghouse to buy bugs, and then try and do some like, oh, maybe we'll lend it to the government for 6 months and then disclose it kind of deal or whatever. But like the
but for Mimikatz.
For Mimikatz.
But for Mimikatz, like,
I want Dan to make his point, but it's worth noting that there are some people that very recently, within the past few weeks, have actually publicized that they're doing exactly that. There are some people who are saying, if you want my tools now, you have to join my Patreon. And there's a lot of conversation. Some of these guys, there's some actually well-known Go guys. There's some people who were actually Go people who kind of silently joined Veil over the past few years, and some of the Veil techniques are actually implemented in Go if you dig down into the source code. And some of these guys, like Bitbleeder and some of these other folks who have written some individual stuff. Like there's some of the people who worked on Crack Mac Exec. Some other names that you guys would recognize have actually very recently said that this is their way of trying to do the No More Free Bugs campaign, that was kind of a thing for a while. And
I was going to say no more free bugs.
I will say I've actually done some work for Exploit Hub. That's still a thing. There is an entire market of like one-dayers who still need that work, and that a lot of people don't know. There's actually an Exploit Hub Metasploit plugin that I worked on for them. They paid me for it.
I guess what the government of Australia and anyone else who is railing against open source security tools needs to understand, like, if those tools aren't open source, you're never going to see them. You're not going to be able to Google them and see what they are. You're not going to be able to like Google the thing in your log and find a reference to this and know even what the hell is going on, because you're not paying these people's Patreons because you don't know who these people are. So it's the difference between a public information or a private, sort of cartel of some sort. A cabal. Cabal is a better word.
I really respect when people sell their techniques like that, because that's your intellectual property, right? And like, if you don't want to open source it and you want to give it to somebody, like, do that. That's you have a whole military industrial complex, like Josh was saying earlier, that does way crazier stuff than that. You know what I mean? And that's very private. But I do want to bring it back just really quick to the debate of the open source stuff and that mom and pop example. And when you look at the mom and pop example, I think I don't want to like call it victim blaming, but there's a certain responsibility that you have to protect your shit, you know what I mean, depending on the value of it, right? And like, I think you have to, that responsibility is true when you're operating in a hostile environment, right? So like, if you're operating in this hostile environment where attacks exist and you have certain values or customers, like, that group absolutely has a responsibility to protect their stuff, like.
This is the Facebook argument. I mean, this is literally the argument being used against all of social media, saying you guys should know better than to let us be stupid and give you your data when you're just going to do subjectively unethical things for it, right? Or with it. And it's like, well, then why can't we say the same thing about security if that's going to be the commonplace woke argument? If you are expected to know the internet is hostile and behave as such, then where does that line lie?
When you're looking at Australia, there are obviously people in Australia that the government could have hired that would have told them to fix, like, what to fix, But it's like, if you go down to, there definitely are. I literally know who they are, right? If someone emails us, I have references. But when you go to smaller and smaller scales, you eventually get to a level where you couldn't, think about like a regional hospital or something that gets hit with ransomware. You know, they've probably got like one IT guy, and when they interviewed that IT guy, they had no idea how to tell if he was a good IT guy or not. You know, other than if he's interviewing for that job, you know, he either doesn't want to move, you know, or I don't know. But like,
I had an uncle who had that job, and he was pretty decent.
I've had that job, and I only sort of knew what I was doing at the time, right? Like they would ask me to fix printers, and I would just go and sort of lay my hands on them, you know, and hope for the best. Well, I didn't really know what I was doing, but like you got one IT guy for a whole hospital. Like what they're doing is they're fixing printers and like re-imaging things and turning the power off and on again, right? Like they're not necessarily on top of all of the things they have to do to all of the equipment and all of the operating systems, you know, to stay on top of whatever, right? Like they may just believe somebody at a black hat vendor booth and install a magic product that they think will keep tigers away.
And they can't even, a lot of hospital infrastructure you can't update because of lab equipment.
Well, yeah, I was gonna say, even if a really interesting thought exercise is like, go read the white papers on the protocols that a lot of this stuff uses. And I'm not even talking about modern stuff like pacemakers. Like there are literally RFCs from the 70s that dictate, for example, how EEG cluster messaging is supposed to work in ICU offices. And it, by definition, has to be unencrypted, has to be wire-based interface, has to be exposed where, you know, you can have multiple. I mean, you are not allowed to make a device that deviates from this spectrum, or you will not get approved by any federally accredited or European accredited agency to put your devices in hospitals, let alone even talking about whether or not people will buy it or whether or not it is actually effective to the consumer. So, I mean, this is a foregone conclusion.
And in all of these systems, right, these vulnerabilities are there whether or not you know they're there, and whether or not you can bully somebody else into talking about it or not, right? Like they're still there, you know. So I think a lot of the people working in security are just get frustrated with everything just being left shitty everywhere, you know, even in like really critical systems like power, you know, hydroelectric stuff, like water purification plants.
Oh
like,
my
there was
God.
that whole
So
SCADA thing, you know.
It's crazy. When I used to work wildland fire, they would say, don't change when you're out of the region you're in, don't use your radio on your truck because it might use a frequency that might hit something that changes an ICS protocol on a dam. And they told that to scare us. And I don't know if that would ever actually happen or not, but that was just sort of insight I got.
I've actually had some cursory conversation with people recently, and I've been on this mode for a while. Of course, people think I'm a horrible person, but I'm very much like, I don't really understand, given all of this, right? We all know that all these problems exist. These problems are not new. They've been around for 20, 30 years. I'm very, well, you know what? In spite of all this, like, even let's just say that every offensive tool out there is a straight up weapon. It's a freaking M16. Well, you know what? It's legal for me to go get a license as a CNC.
Second Amendment.
Right, and to go make fucking M16s and sell them to subjectively appropriate parties in accordance with U.S. law. Why the shit can't I do that with offensive tools? Or straight up malware? Like, I don't understand. If I can get a license to make a literal firearm, why can't I get a license to make a literal computer virus?
And
I don't think you need a license because it's a First Amendment thing, right? Because code is speech.
Code is speech.
The answer is you can't get a license because this is all decided by case law. Basically, if you make anything that aids someone in a crime, if the case law says that people who make that thing are also held liable, then you do. This is the same law that is used to try people that make communications devices for drug dealers and, you know, secure phones and all. Like, there's some stuff that ends up falling into this category and there's some stuff that doesn't. And ultimately, it's basically everything falls into this category, and the only thing that keeps you safe is case law, with the exception of actual weapons. Actual weapons have this special category where they say, if you have a license and if you make them this way and if you sell them to these people, then we won't prosecute you. And for some reason, like, we're not allowed to play in that pool.
Well,
so there's like an
Colt
indemnification
firearms.
thing.
Well,
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Colt firearms can be sued now. I think some Sandy Hook families sued or went to court so that they can sue Colt Firearms over the manufacturing of the AR-15.
Wow.
and I think the courts approved that, so they don't have that protection, which is pretty groundbreaking if you think about it.
It is.
But I think one of the going back to like how everything is held together by bubble gum and duct tape and paper clips. I having tested like machines that run the internet, like big large machines, and having knocked those over. Um, I think that the internet exists because people are generally good. I mean, the same
Absolutely.
way in general. I mean, the United States is going through a lot of turmoil right now. It seems like our history is more turmoil than it is quiet periods. But I think the same thing in society is the society what we have now it exists because people are generally good. Um, that there are people that need to be locked up in society. But generally speaking, and I think that's
There are many definitions of good, right? Like,
yeah, yeah, exactly.
Although I would caveat that with like human conflict is super old. Like we've been warring forever. So
Yep.
while I do think people are generally good, like there's always somebody out there that might take your shit. You know what I mean? Like
Oh yeah.
human
Well,
conflict.
there are patriots in every country,
Yeah.
and if they're acting in patriotically in the best interest of their country, they're a good person as far as they see it, most likely.
I mean,
You
our
know,
Navy SEALs I'm a former Marine myself, but our Navy SEAls are basically our form of what could be like not Mossad, but uh, other countries probably view them as terrorists, or even our Green Berets, right? I mean, they could label Green Berets as terrorists because we get like Green Berets go into other countries and they cause riots. They try to overthrow governments. I mean, they could label Green Berets as
Cambodia has history books to this day that still call Green Berets terrorists for the work they did fighting North Viet Cong, breaching country lines, trying to chase suppliers
yeah,
of tunnels.
yeah. I mean,
just saying good and bad gets super complicated when international
yeah.
relations are involved, right?
Oh,
There's no
absolutely.
us and them gets like super complicated,
Well,
but
and this is my point, right? Is like what
Yeah.
I started the part. My anecdote at the beginning of this segment was like, and this is why, quite frankly, infosec people should probably stop talking about it. Aside from paying lobbyists to fight for your side or the other, because you know what? If humans, as an entire species, have not figured out our universal stance on arms dealing, the idea that somehow our little corner of the internet is going to figure it out is freaking ridiculously arrogant.
Right.
I really think it's worth like restating. It's like humans are, on the whole, pretty good, and I think the open source offensive tool situation kind of proves it. Because if you look at Shodan or something, looking at for a specific bug, you can see how many unowned instances there are just sitting on the internet, easily locatable. And the proof of concept code is like well documented in GitHub. So literally all somebody has to do is like, check something out of Git, build it, run it against, something they find in Shodan, and they'll pop some box somewhere.
If you
And
go back to the
it
inspiration of all,
it doesn't happen. It does happen sometimes, but the number of times it doesn't happen is astonishing.
I think it's
Yeah.
also worth bringing up if you go back to like all these tools we've talked about, the inspiration behind all of them has been like Josh is saying, it's a good thing. Like we want more understanding, we want to show a technique, we want to detect a technique, we want to teach people in a competition. Like none of us are out here like writing these tools to like go like rob a bunch of people. You know what I mean? Like we're doing this for understanding to promote our causes.
Well, and
My favorite.
I
Go
was
ahead.
just going to say,
Soundbite. There's the soundbite for court later.
I was going to say, and to Josh's point, the reason a lot of us aren't doing that is because at the end of the day, a lot of us are gainfully employed. And so because we're not starving and we're not in the Bulgarian Vyrus factory and we don't feel a reason to literally turn to crime, we have this skill that we could choose to crime and we choose instead. Many people choose instead, not just to be neutral as, I am because I'm a horrible person, but they actually do choose to educate and to to foster and to stand on the shoulders of giants scientifically, rather than to engage in what most would consider to be nefarious behavior.
My favorite
Really
accusation that gets leveled is when people sort of like, I don't know if it's from a sense of projection or of just a sense of wanting to like otherize someone who could be your ally, say that people are doing this for the glory or the clout, which is just ridiculous because a lot of the folks I know who do this are like almost anonymous online, and like don't even try to do much to, you know, push it out there besides talk to their folks who are friends in the industry. And it's just sort of, I don't know. I think there's a lot of sort of very uncharitable undertones to the debate that sort of move beyond logical politics and are sort of just sort of personal feelings of either frustration, animosity, lack of understanding, feeling of superiority logically that someone else doesn't understand the position that they're coming from. It's just what I've seen.
It's mostly people that are cleaning up after open source tools, from what I've seen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would also say this is an avenue where, at least speaking as an American, that the federal government has chosen to remain silent. And there have been, I've seen prior to the current administration and all the polarization that's come with it, and we were still having more nuanced conversations about this sort of thing, there definitely was a general sentiment after Stuxnet became public that I would argue, and you know, I could bring up data, but it's debatable, so I won't say that I have evidence to prove one side versus the other. But in my opinion, the more rational discourse that evolved from the discussion around the publicization of Stuxnet was very much, well, here is a new weapon type that has now reached a level of complexity where we as a society should discuss how we want these weapons to be used in our name. And we're quite frankly not allowed to have that discussion because the government refuses to acknowledge that it's a thing that they do.
Yeah.
I think there's been a lot of, with our government in particular and cybersecurity, there's been a lot of shuffling between administrations. I don't think anyone even tuned into it at all until the W. Bush administration, and then it was, the Air Force and some other places were fighting to be like the center of excellence for cybersecurity, and then Obama took over and totally changed, the whole model and brought in this like council of private industry people. And it just, nothing the U.S. government has tried in terms of like public administration seems to have been that effective. Although I have seen, signs of improvement here or there. The more, people from our industry get people to actually pay attention to specific issues. There's been some regulatory changes in certain areas, especially the power plant stuff. I saw a lot of progress in that over the last 10 years. Some other areas, definitely I think the SCADA and the ICS boom led to a lot of those systems being improved in a way that actually makes me feel better, more or less. I feel like the odds that someone can log in from the internet and turn my power off have been reduced somewhat based on the efforts of people beating on these systems when they were in their earlier stages. And those people, in order to effectively beat on those systems in the early stages, need to exchange information about how best to beat on systems.
Yes.
In an open forum where they don't have to, pay a la carte. Otherwise,
Or
it's
get a license. So
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Talk about it.
Because that's just a time sink. Like you go on a project and you have a fixed amount of time on the project. The time it takes for you to requisition with a vendor, go through a purchase order, get a license, go through some sort of verification process of identity, which might exist in some hypothetical future, takes time away from you actually identifying what risk there is in the system.
If someone wants to go on Twitter after they've been awake for 3 days dealing with some ransomware shit and they want to like vent, like
Right.
who the fuck, posts
I really
like
wanna
attack
talk-
source on GitHub, I get that. I understand that.
I really want to just touch on a point that Josh brought up earlier, which is like they are responding to these incidents and like they live this life, but like you know, I've lived that life as well. I was a consultant at Mandiant, right? And like I did this incident response at Uber, and it was a boon when you found an open source tool. It saved you so much time because you had source code. Like, are you serious? It's a good thing.
You know capabilities, you know everything about it. You can get
yeah, I'm
quick
not reversing a
IOCs,
binary.
yeah, it's easy.
Yeah, the other thing I'll say is that I've done a bit of work in a cloud context where the APIs are, there's no sort of like syscall boundary. Like the things that you're hardening against the attack sort of boundaries and privilege boundaries. You make assumptions about, like, if you get code exec on a box, it's probably something that you don't think as much about because you are looking at sort of the systems level of how you manage sort of instances and managed instances. And the APIs between those things are a lot tighter, and there's a lot finer control that you can put on them. And so if someone releases a tool, in my experience, everyone was like, "Oh, this is awesome," and then they write something that's either a detection for it in the managed environment, or they make updates to documentation for configuration, or and it's the iteration loop is just sort of expected that that's how this works. And I've heard this also in sort of the DevOps community, that how this is working for a lot of things as well. And how much of this is implicit on the fact that we have systems with boundaries that are so hard to make defensible for reasons that you have to, like, people have to run old binaries, people have to do lots of things, but that's sort of some of the latent undertone that is never discussed. And there's never any pushback against the people who sort of like manage the APIs or are defining the boundaries that defenders have to harden.
Yeah, basically, your rural hospital IT people should be handed, equipment that is more or less secure by default. That's sort of the dream, right? So they don't necessarily need to have this giant body of specialized knowledge because they are a generalist. They've got to fix whatever breaks down in that hospital. And that means they're probably not going to be super deep on any one part of it, And it's just sort of how to evolve the involved systems to get to that point, right? But I think I really like kind of the way Josh and Vyrus were framing it earlier, where it's sort of like you either have open source offensive security tools or you have no more free bugs.
Right.
Those seem like the two things that would happen, given the wind blowing one way or the other. Like, and I think the open source road is more beneficial, to the goal of quickly evolving our core systems to be less vulnerable.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing that if you are getting a new antivirus or EDR, just taking the tools that are out there that are open source and say, all right, what can you detect? Like, these are going to be used by someone, most likely. Have you been doing your homework as an EDR, as an AV vendor? Are you going to detect this in your default mode? If not, why not? There's definitely a kind of a, this is the bar. That's basically what open source tooling does. It says, this is the bar, this is what you should detect. Are you doing it? And some of the techniques are pretty advanced. You look at Mimikatz, it's like a work of art. It's really cool. I love it. You can invoke it different ways that makes it harder to detect. But you look at Windows, they're making it harder to use PowerShell, right? They made it as an offensive tool. I mean, when PowerShell was like in its in its heyday, like 2012, I mean, it was like God mode. You could do anything you want. Now it's kind of like you got to have some permissions. You got to have some, it's gotten a lot harder. So yeah, there's progress overall.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'd like to kind of pivot off this topic. There was one thing that came up earlier that I kind of wanted to follow up on. So you said your dad worked on actual missiles,
Munitions. Real.
munitions.
Yeah.
So was he a rocket scientist?
He was a rocket scientist. Yeah, he was an aerospace
Yeah.
engineer. Yeah, literal
Wow.
rocket scientist.
So
Like
yeah,
like
I gather that's hard. I don't know, but
he's loving the stuff that SpaceX is doing for sure.
so
Landing rockets, standing up, it's pretty phenomenal. But
so
anyway,
did you learn much about computers from him? He was an engineer. Was he a computer engineer
yeah.
or like more like
No, he was an
airfoil stuff?
aerospace engineer. He joined the Air Force to avoid Vietnam, and he went into he got shipped out to Canada, and he was changing out fuses for nuclear weapons in the Canadian tundra because we had silos up there, and so his job was behind an asbestos curtain to remove fuses from change out fuses. That was, and then he went
Wow.
to University of Florida after that, and got a job at an Air Force base, and was doing work around um, munitions and the development of said munitions. So yeah, so I got to go. My first interaction with a computer outside of Pac-Man at a pizza place, when you're like 5 years old, was my parents brought home, I guess, on a loan a TI computer that had a tape deck, and it played. I guess it was Space Invaders. You could play off a tape deck, I think, and what was interesting about that is it was like looking at fire. Like you could stare at it forever. It was just the most amazing thing to be able to see. It was basically a TV that you can interact with. It was phenomenal, right? It was just, we take it for granted now. Um, but I was 5, and they sent it back to the factory because I guess it was too much of a distraction. So the next interactions with computers were friends had a Commodore 64, and we would try to program games out of books in BASIC, and it never came out right. It was like Bomberman, where a guy like would drop a bomb off a roof, and you're supposed to catch it from hitting the ground. But the problem is, it never looked right. It was like it would drop this mutilated pixel, and your guy that was kind of there but wasn't. Whenever it changed location, you had to catch it, and you couldn't. It was just horrible. We were horrible programmers at 7, and so this continued. Like I really, I never had a computer in the house. My dad, I mean, we didn't even have a color TV. My dad was an aerospace engineer. He didn't believe in like a lot of things. A lot of things. He was a phenomenal engineer. But I went to the Marines at 20 because I couldn't. It took me a couple years to figure out what I wanted to do. So I go into the Marines, and I ace the ASVAB. They're like, because I wanted to go into, I wanted to be a grunt. I wanted to do frontline combat. That's where I was in life. I had a death wish, right? I was like 20 years old. I was like, I basically want to just go berserk and do the Marine thing. And they're like, you're pretty smart. You probably shouldn't do that. So they sent me and I did like this D-Lab test, and I was smart enough to do, scored well enough to do Chinese or Russian. And then they're like, well, let's send you over and do the signals intelligence test. And I took that and didn't miss anything. And they're like, well, you should do signals intelligence. I was like, all right. So the first time that I learned how to type was at Morse Intercept Operator School to intercept Morse code. You had 2 weeks to type 20 words per minute, and on these paragraphs that they would show you, and I didn't know how to type. So I basically memorized the paragraph and just pecked to pass, and I passed. I got in, and then after that I learned how to type because it'd be like, all right, copy A. It'd be like dot 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 A, and then B. Whatever, ba dot dot or I can't remember. It was like, no, A is da and B is da dot dot. Yeah. Anyway, so I learned how to. I could, at the end of that, I could copy 25 or no 22 5-letter groups per minute. And so you can go online and see how fast that is. It literally sounds like Bra, ra, 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 it's like really fast. I could do that, and so that's how I learned how to type. And then I went on to another school, follow-on school, and so the first school was 6 months. The follow-on school was 6 months, and that was the really interesting one. It was basically a signal analysis course put on by people that do signal analysis, and uh, so I learned a lot in that course how to look at signals and break them down, and it taught me basically um, still how I look at crypto implementations today. It's like maybe you can't break the crypto, but you can find a issue in the implementation, right? And then after that, I went to Hawaii. I was in Hawaii for like in '98. No, it was in '97. '97, yeah. And when I got there, they're like, "Hey, I joined a radio battalion. This is the same radio battalion that Dave Kennedy was part of. A relic.
From Trusted Sec.
Yeah. So he was there after me. I got out of the Marines, and then he went to the same unit. But they're like, "Hey, you want to join Radio Recon?" Which is, you put on these, you carry the signal intelligence equipment. You go behind enemy lines. You collect signals behind enemy lines. Like you parachute in. You get on the Zodiacs. It was like, I was like, yeah, I want to do that. And so I go to, I pass the recon indoctrination, and then I go on to, I go to jump school. I passed that. I go to SEER school, and I lost like 20 pounds in a week because they don't feed you for a week.
Yeah.
And they beat you. They put you in. Basically, it's like simulation of Getmo, right? And then after that, they said, "Hey, you're going to recon school." And I'm like, "Well, I just lost 20 pounds." It's like, "Well, you're going." I'm like, "Well, okay." So I go and I survive for about a month, a little over a month, and I get stress fractures in both legs because I'm emaciated. I weigh 135 pounds, and we're running with like 90-pound packs. So, so I drop out of recon school, and then I get put behind a desk for a year, and they say, "You're our new terminal area security officer." I'm like, "What is that?" They're like, "Oh, you're going to secure the computers." So I'm like, all right. So at that point, everything was like Windows 3.11, NT4 was rolling out. So there was no security. So I was like, this is easy. I mean, like, I was able to get into the base commander's computer because he mounted his C drive on the network, right? So you could see all his files. I, reported that. That was my first bug that I ever reported was, like, I could see all your judicial, like, rulings that are coming out. So it was kind of fun. So that's really where I got a taste for security, and that was like back in '98, I think. Yeah, that was '98. So after that, I really started, getting online. There was really not many options in the barracks. You couldn't get. The only option you had was AOL. That's all you had, and so used AOL, and soon I was downloading tools that could knock people off AOL that would do other things. They had other capabilities. One time, someone, because if you were using AOL at the time, someone would break into your room. I mean, I'm sorry. Someone broke into my room, and I could tell they broke into my room because their username was still there whenever they logged out. So I put a keylogger on my workstation and canceled their account because back in the day, once your account was canceled, you couldn't recover it. So that was my first time using a keylogger and all this other stuff. So I mean, it wasn't glamorous. I wasn't like hacking my high school or anything like that. But yeah, and then after the Marines, I went to University of Florida, got a degree in computer science and business, and just had fun at the computer lab because everything was direct connection to the internet. So there was fun to be had there. But yeah, it was a good experience. And after University of Florida, I got a job at PwC, which is, I don't suggest it. Anyone in our field should avoid PwC.
The big four.
The big four. Yeah. I mean, it's like, don't do it. So after that, went to Booz Allen. I had a pretty good experience at Booz Allen. I defended networks. I attacked networks. some pretty big networks, hundreds of thousands of hosts. The government has these massive networks. They did a lot of interesting assessments on critical infrastructure, what we like some people consider critical infrastructure, but then the government considers other things critical infrastructure. So I got to do a lot of interesting reviews that, is just I can't even bring up. But after that, I did some pen testing there. After that, went to Leviathan Security and really got into doing a lot of serious AppSec work. Like a lot of Leviathan clients are people that make secure products, or at least there's a promise of security. And so a lot of the work was really, really interesting. But yeah, and then after Leviathan, I roundabout went to Okta, and that's where I've been since. And so it's been a pretty good career so far. I feel like I'm just getting started.
Where in there did you learn to code?
I just I started picking up a little bit in the Marines on my own, but majority of it happened in college. I mean, I took COBOL. Right. This is after the century. There was COBOL. They taught COBOL. It was an English teacher at UF that taught COBOL.
You know what? You can still find work in COBOL. So
I don't. I'd rather not.
You can always, there's always money in the COBOL.
It was a big thing with the updating the unemployment systems recently.
Yeah. I think that wasn't it responsible for Y2K also. I think it was the yeah. I'd rather stay away from COBOL. But then yeah. So C, Java, and then I got into Python because it's just, to me, Python is actually closer to C. Like Ruby feels like Perl to me.
Ruby kind of never. I mean, only if Metasploit hadn't switched to Ruby, I don't know who'd still be using Ruby at this point.
Well, that's me.
Yeah.
But I'm like an N of one.
You're like a tech hipster. You're just doing things, so you'll be the only one doing it.
I know people that use Ruby like religiously.
I have. It just fits my workflow. Anyway, we don't need to talk about that.
Yeah. It's who I am.
Look, I could never write in Ruby because I couldn't get the Neil Diamond song out of my head. It's a real problem.
Anyway, Python is it's got C types.
Yeah.
Python's got everything. It's got lambdas.
Yeah.
It's got C types. So I actually had a follow-up question from all of that. You said something about the way they taught you signal analysis informs how you think about crypto. So you had the one example, like there's often implementation details. I was wondering if there was if there were any other sort of axioms you remember.
Oh yeah, you can't really go into too much. I mean, it's old school, but it's still like it was classified. So
all right,
yeah.
No
but
problem.
so like think about so let's say you're using AES for GCM for let's say that's secure, right? You would assume that's secure, but it depends on how you're using it. For example, if you're using Chef data bags, it will tell you the exact length of your password that is stored if you're using AES GCM, because it's not padded out. At least the last time I looked at it. So if you have a weak password of like 5 or 6 characters, it's not block cipher. It will, let's see, GCM not block. It will tell you, like, say, a 5-character password, 6-character password, it should be 6 characters. 6 bytes in length. Yeah. So I mean, it depends on how you use it. And so if you were to get someone's like Chef data bags from like an exposed GitHub repo, and it links to a service that is exposed to the internet, so they can't lock it, but for whatever reason, let's say it's SSH, right? So you can just guess, keep hitting it and guess, like, whatever combination of 5-character password would be. So there are the devil's in the details. Like I mean, it's like IoT devices, right? You know, I've looked at a number of IoT devices, and they just don't implement a PRNG because they can't. There isn't no chip. There isn't a chip that can handle it on the board. So, you know, how do you implement a seed? You know, at that point, do you just say X amount of seconds after boot and grab a seed, or do you know, what do? You do a DNS lookup of some long random, which you think is random, but it's in the source. There's always, you know, implementation issues that are kind of good to look at. And these are old things. It's like look at PRNG, look at nonces. You know, it just depends on the crypto that they're using.
Well, it's like the side channels, and you don't attack the crypto, you attack the things around the crypto, the things going into it, right? Like the configuration.
Exactly. I could have just said side channel,
side channels.
Um,
No, that's good stuff. Thank you.
Yeah, so the new BDF rewrite. If you guys want to hear about it.
Yeah, by all means.
Yeah. Okay. So it's going to be so it's version Python 2 right now. It's going to be Python 3. All the things that I implemented originally is going to be ported over, and there are a lot of things that I've kept notes over the years that'd be great to do. So environmental key payloads, right? The book cipher encoder, trampolines out of the 0xCC sections, off entry point patching, control flow guard patching. Because if you parse the load config, I haven't done this in a long time, so I think it's the load config PE portion of the header of the PE file. You get all the locations where control flow guard is located, and so those are known points that control flow is going to go. So if you were to hook,
where did you say that was in the PE header?
It's the load. It's the load config. I think it's load config section. It's the load order. It's been a while. It's been a long time since it's been like 2 or 3 years.
That's one of those fields in the PEB. I don't know what it is, right?
Yeah. So I think in the original Backdoor Factory, I think I if you look at the code, I do disassemble it, or not disassemble it, but parse it. I believe. I think I added that as a preprocessor. Maybe I'm wrong, but yeah. So I mean, if you were to hook each one of those points and then have a check to make sure that you're not constantly launching shellcode over and over again, that could be a place where you could do off entry point patching, because it's known control. Look, that's the code is going to hit there eventually. So yeah, there's a lot of things that I want to add back in or develop further, and I need the mental calisthenics. You know, I need a challenge. So
sometimes hard to come by with the quarantine and the general lack of lots of stimulus.
Yeah,
I have a goal, you know.
If you're spending, for me, there's if I'm spending too much time in, you know, Jira, I get ornery, you know, or some other, you know, program for managing tickets. But
almost all of my programming these days is just because I enjoy it. You know, it's all side projects. People very rarely want me to write code, during my day job.
Yeah, I was writing code the other day, and I was like, "This is exciting." I'm writing code to manage, like, via SSH, different servers, and you know, in our team we have a DevOps guy, and I didn't consult him beforehand because it just wasn't. It took me an hour to write, And I was like, hey guys, I can do this, just because we got this thing we're doing. And he's like, you could have just used Ansible. And I'm like, fuck you. Thanks.
Well, if you use Ansible, he would have been like, "Oh, you could have just used Terraform. You could have just used
No,
Chef. You could have just used Salt. It's like you could have just would you end up using like SSH-E in a bash loop? That's how I do
mean,
it.
well, no, I just used subprocess, check output, and logging, and just
Oh, Python
you know,
style.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I just wrote because I can do code execution like through like certain things I want to do, and I just wrote like safety checks in there so no one got stupid with it, like no RMs, so it's safer than Ansible. But whatever.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, but
I was just gonna comment too. I'm really looking forward to the next podcast, Ben, because I feel like your tools have been inspiring a lot of people. Like you had the banana phone thing, and then also what's his face, Captain Space Hook. Like I feel like that thing that he wrote was really cool. So I just wanted to comment. Like it's been really fun watching like that whole Go community.
And yeah, I mean, like, even just outside of hacker tooling, like, I've been thinking about uses for the debug library that would be interesting for, like, I've been doing some stuff with folding at home, and I've been going deep into how the binary that manages the GPU process does syscalls, and it calls clock get time just an obscene number of times per second, where it takes up like 10% of the overhead of the process. And I'm like, can I patch that out? And can I get a little bit better folding performance? And I don't know, but it might be the case that the debug library might be useful because I have a binary and I don't have symbols. So I mean, I'd reverse it eventually, but like unpacking it and repacking it, one of those things where like there's uses outside of just malicious stuff for a lot of the stuff. So just I'm very excited to see where sort of the shadow Go operating system leads, because that's kind of what it's turning into at a whole point. You have syscall implementations, you have drivers, you have process managers, schedulers.
File systems. Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, there's virtual file systems. There's a loader now.
Oh yeah, Loro NFS.
Oh yeah,
do
that
you,
too.
do they have Golang DLLs yet, or do you even need them?
I
think you can build.
Well, yeah, you can compile to a DLL and you can compile a DLL, but everything is still mostly statically linked unless you use an external linker. But you can use an external linker. Basically, you can do it with Cgo.
Okay.
But you can also do it with syscall, which is a library that uses Cgo under the hood, but it handles some of the mechanics for you. And then this banana phone thing is like on top of syscall, it extends syscall to redirect it to not use load library and instead just go directly to the PEB and use Hell's Gate when available. Pretty wild.
Yeah.
But that actually heavily uses the debug library that we wrote in our attempts to port your code starting about a year and a half ago.
That's pretty awesome.
So that's how everything ties together. But it's yeah, I knew I mean I knew almost nothing about binary formats. I'd heard some stuff mentioned. I wasn't even that familiar with like shellcode I mean, I knew some stuff, but nothing like I know now. So I really just I spent an enormous amount of time reading your code and picking out like why like everything was a certain way, at great length.
I apologize for that.
Once, yeah.
I read my code now and I'm like, man, I'm an asshole.
That's every programmer.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's I mean, that thing is just the line count on that is
It's a lot.
Pretty extraordinary. Yeah. There's a lot going on in there.
Yeah, it's one of my goals is to to unpack. Like there's things I want to do, but because of the Rube Goldberg style machine that it is, like it feels like to me that's written is that I have to rip things apart and make them more modular. Like everything's gonna be a module. Like shellcode obviously is a module. Patching methods are gonna be a module, and it's gonna get loaded dynamically on the fly, so that if you have some other module that meets the standard of what needs to be in a module, you can just drop it in. So if you have a different off, like if you have off entry or something that works that's custom, you can just drop it in. The reason that I'm like writing it in Python versus Go or anything is just because that's my language of efficiency.
Judgment.
Go
Absolutely.
hurts. Like yeah, but the thing is like these things once it's first stable releases out, it's going to be easy to read.
The only people that really like Go, I think, have been somewhat infected by Plan 9. It's like you either have like Plan 9 in you or not, but it's a certain type of weird OCD where everything always has to be in the same order.
Yeah, it's definitely
it's the only
not
way
the
I can
whole-
explain it.
It's not the whole security community either. Like so many people,
No.
I feel like you had so many people in Python and PowerShell, and then there was like this huge split where so many people went to C Sharp, right? Stay in that Windows environment and get that like dynamic sharp loading. And then I feel like a bunch of us were like, nah, F that. We're gonna go to all three operating systems, which also heavily inspired by like BDF, where like you're already targeting all three operating systems, right? So it's like let's
Makes
just keep
sense.
that up.
I mean, Python does that too, and Python
Yeah.
has lambdas. So
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I just remember writing Go for Ebola, and I'm like, no, I want to do that. I want that specific point. I want to edit that the way I want. I want like it was like the string versus byte, I think, conundrum.
Oh, yeah.
I was like,
One
no,
does
I
not
know,
simply-
I can do this.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm like, I can do this. If this was C, I know I can do this. And it's like, no. I'm like, God damn it. Okay, Go. Yeah.
Yeah, it's strongly typed languages can be very annoying.
Mhm.
That is true. But so I'm really looking forward to your updated version. Mostly because I learned so much from the last version. I think the only thing other than the archive stuff, the only real bug I fixed in there, I think it just sort of it aged out. So what happened in Linux since the original Backdoor Factory went end of support to now is that by default all of the system binaries are now position independent executables. And I'm only going to tell you this because I beat my head against the desk for like 3 days on this until it kind of worked out. And it's not documented at all well, right? Mm-hmm. So the way a regular executable looks, an ELF executable looks on a Linux system now is that it actually is. It doesn't have the exec flag set in the header. It has the din flag set in the header, like a dynamic library.
Okay.
And the system loader just magically knows that it's really a position independent executable and not a shared library, and will jump to the real entry point in the header as if it were an executable, rather than going to one of the 3 options for regular dynamic library entry points in ELF, which are back in the dynamic section. So that's what the position independent executable behavior is. And what you have to do to detect this is super freaking weird. So the only way you can tell if an ELF is a shared library versus a Pi exec is whether or not it has an interpreter section. So a din type with an interpreter section is really a position independent executable. And that's the only way to tell. And there's an exception to this, which infuriates me. But the exception to this is libc itself, which has an interpreter section, but is a shared library.
Is this ld.so or?
Yes, because every exec uses libc as its interpreter, but libc needs ld.so as its interpreter, so it can like go all the way down to the Linux bottom.
Yep. I mean, you saw the threads where I was dealing with this weekend.
Yeah. And the only way I eventually figured that out is I was like, IDA solves this problem. Like, how does IDA solve this problem?
Nice. So
And that's
you just look for those two sections and then determine from there. That's
yeah.
it?
So if you look at the interpreter section, so the din flag. So if exec is set, it's a static old style exec. You follow the real entry point. If din is set, it could be a shared library. It could be a PI. So if din is set, you look at the interpreter section. If interpreter is not set, you know it's a shared library. If interpreter is set, it's probably a PI executable, unless it's libc, which my code doesn't handle. So if you do it on libc, it's just going to shit the bed, and that's why, in case
Nice.
someone's wondering later.
Yeah.
Because libc can have all kinds of different names, and there can be different libc implementations. So it's like, I don't know how to handle that well.
Interesting.
But
yeah, that's another thing
anyway.
I want to tackle is DLL patching.
So I found an algorithm from that and some Mozilla code that I stole.
Okay.
The project was called it's under Mozilla. The project was called Positron, and inside their Positron project, there's a subutility called elfhack, which actually has some really excellent comments documenting exactly how you hook the shared library entry point for elf. And for PE, I think it's actually a bit simpler. The problem is that elf there's a field or a vector, and the vector can have like just one entry, or it can have multiple entries. So you end up with 3 special cases you have to handle, and it gets kind of irritating.
Interesting.
But well,
Cool.
I'm winding down. Does anyone have any final questions or plugs or comments?
Just very excited that we were able to get Josh on the pod, and really riveting conversation from my perspective as someone who doesn't necessarily have their head in this full time and works in a little different part of the space most of the time.
Yeah, this was great. This was so much fun. Yeah, it's really nice to meet you. After I feel like I've been like nerd stalking you for so long, like like sifting through all your code and figuring out how it works, and like I had like a murder board on the wall, with like yarn and all this, So, but I'm glad I didn't.
With my face on it.
I'm glad I didn't come off as creepy, right? Like full bunny boiler here.
No, it's cool. No,
the imitation is
sincerest form of flattery. There you go.
No, I appreciate it. It's been fun. Yeah, I mean, like I can't make any promises, but after the next version's out and I get some new features in it, I might try my hand at Go. Yeah, because there's Go, right? So there's I have other things that I want to do, and one of those things is BDF is JavaScript.
Oh.
So imagine a extension in your browser that you can get your own code in it. That can.
Funny story.
Yeah.
Apparently, you can use I believe it was the TinyGo compiler to compile Go code to WebAssembly.
Yes, you can.
Well, that's a short order.
Yeah, and also you can instrument the WebAssembly using V8 and gluing it together with a bit of C, exactly the same way that Electron and Node.js do, FYI.
And there's obviously going to be Python to WASM WebASM interpreters too, if you're so inclined.
There are a few. I haven't tried any of them to do any of the like relatively system invasive stuff or seen anything else doing that, but it doesn't seem like too far of a stretch.
So the idea would be BDF is a JavaScript script or in JavaScript that would you have a vulnerable browser extension that you can load code into, that it would just live there, right? Or a web worker, local storage that would let's say you have a download coming through and you would do your thing in the browser. So yeah.
Wow, or like a malicious Chrome extension or something, right?
Yeah,
Where you give it permissions to access traffic from other sites that lets it in the right bucket.
right.
Yeah, it wasn't. It was way before the days of WebAssembly, but in the early days of Open Capture the Flag, we did something similar like that with a malicious Firefox extension. It's pretty evil.
Nice.
Yeah, it. Man, I should wrangle CP onto one of these episodes. He was pretty ninja with it. It did all this crazy stuff. It like changed its UUID upon installation, so you couldn't uninstall it, and it like hooked your password database as a function of the API when it loaded, and it would randomly, within a certain time span, broadcast your entire credential database in plain text over like a random port through like AJAX, like to just the internet, and like it's so crazy.
I like it when these things just like slowly ramp up to like more and more extreme, like things.
Yeah, it was a
Just
thing. That was actually technically the second. That was actually the second publicly documented incident of like 949 got a visit from the FBI because apparently someone from a TLA was playing our game and had a credential on our like wall of shame that started as an unredacted screen, unlike the wall of sheep screen. And they came to us and they were like, so that the wall of sheep, they redact their creds. And we're like, yeah. And we're like, okay, you know why they redact their creds? Because we told them to. Hint, hint.
Yeah. The value of non-proliferation.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's why you might want environmentally keyed implants or whatever. Well, so Vyrus, do you have any final questions or comments?
Well, I'm a little bit. I mean, maybe I missed it, but I'm a little bit curious what the new plans are for the resurgence of Backdoor Factory work.
Well, I actually was so how are we gonna be able to see this code, Josh?
Yeah, so I'm one of those people that are I have sponsors on GitHub. If you pay $1 when it's stable, you'll get it. $1, whatever the minimum sponsorship. If you want to see me make really bad decisions in Get, that's like $5 a month to see behind the scenes and how bad I am at writing code. So that it stays open source, it will be released open source, because it's still going to be open source. It's going to be released a year or two after my sponsors get it. So awesome. It's to keep the reason I want sponsors, or at least to have the concept of sponsors, because it's kind of like a vote of confidence, and kind of it puts me on the hook to do the work. Even if there's one guy like giving me $1, it's like, well, there's one guy that like is expecting me to do something. Yeah, it's not good return on my investment, but it's it just says, yeah, there's some. So the thing is, regular BDF now gets still around between 2,000 and 2,500 downloads every 2 weeks on GitHub. So someone's using this. And I'm not expecting to have that many people pay, but it would be interesting to see if people really want to support the next version, and it kind of just helps encourage me to keep going, because it's a pretty big, as you know, Ben, it was a big task. write all this code, as you all know. Yeah.
I'm exactly the same way with projects. Like, I absolutely have to be accountable to somebody. Because growing up in Wisconsin, I'm predominantly motivated by guilt, and I think people don't really understand that, right? Like, if I'm not experiencing guilt, I'm not moving, right? Because when you're not feeling guilty, that's when you can rest. You know,
Ben will
that's how
tell you.
that works.
Ben and Dan will tell you there is a fair amount of projects we've done together just because A, they're smart people, and B, doing it with them was an excuse to make sure that I got it done.
Yeah.
Yep. I could see that.
Yeah, we're all exactly the same way. Like, we need just a little bit of accountability, or we can, find some other way of entertaining ourselves like that.
I did want to
No comment.
Yeah.
I did want to
No comment.
say thank you, Josh. Like, I've just learned a ton from the tools, and same with Vyrus, man. Like, throughout the years, I've just learned a ton, just from looking at the code and the techniques. And same Ben, like, so just thank you guys. Like, I find huge value in it, like, from learning.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, and the Cyrus, like, your Go code is really like the Go Mimikatz is really pretty awesome. That helped launch Ebola. So yeah, and you've been helpful when I've had questions about different things. So yeah.
I mean, likewise, man. We all have a back chatter. It's definitely a standing on the shoulders of giants doing sideways, which I will also volunteer just to make sure that I don't screw it up. Hopefully, a new version of Go Mimikatz is coming, largely based on Go Donut, which Dan and Ben
that's all Ben.
Oh, nice.
Which there's been episodes about in the past, but it is some really cool work. It is a really cool way to solve the what I tend to call the how do I package my loader problem. And they have solved it even more directly and, in my opinion, more elegantly than I have. So
nice.
But what a problem, man! We've been dealing with that for years, dude.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's definitely a extreme but very quiet form of satisfaction to have, like, things I have wanted to exist for so long, and I feel like I just do nothing but end up harassing my friends with these things because, like, I talk about them wanting to exist, but I don't have either the time and or the skills to bring them to fruition all by my own, and then, like, I leave and feel bad and feel like I'm just bitching, and then time goes by and, like, my friends do these things and I'm like, oh crap, they did it. That's awesome.
Have y'all ever done any poking around at Spark installations on the internet? You know what Spark does? Apache Spark. It's like
a little bit.
Yeah. So Apache Spark does basically it's coordinates jobs for machine learning or data processing, and
Is it Java based?
No,
it compiles with JVM.
Well, I mean,
yeah.
So
I mean, I have some general guidelines for all Apache Foundation code. Basically, a lot of it uses Zookeeper, and Zookeeper should not really be exposed to the internet for a variety of reasons.
Yes.
Zookeeper has a lot of problems. The other big one is Apache Foundation Java-based code tends to use Kafka, their own internal message bus stuff, and it tends to use Zookeeper, also their own internal thing. And both of those have a tendency by default to turn on JMX. And if you don't explicitly set a password for JMX, it's an unauth'd RCE using a default Metasploit plugin.
Mm-hmm.
You're not wrong. But
and if that bug sounds familiar, that was the Ghidra bug also.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can say, because it's public, from a scale perspective, Stripe is using this at scale for a lot of our machine learning internally, and it's very effective. From the perspective of, we have a whole team of people that are very good at what they do. They're very good at finance, and they're very good at math, and they're not necessarily computer people per se.
Mhm.
Yet they are able to research and deploy machine learning models to predict millions of dollars in fraud literally in minutes,
Mhm.
entirely using this tooling. So security bugs aside, like scale wise, there's a supreme effectiveness there.
Yeah, that Apache Foundation stuff, it scales well, like it works pretty well, but it's not something you can deploy with default settings and expect to be fine. Like it requires a little bit of thinking about sort of network trust boundaries and who can get where, especially when you're setting up Zookeeper clusters. Kafka as a bus is actually a little less sketchy. But you should never let anyone connect to your Zookeeper control ports unless you intend to let them kill you.
It might be something for the listeners to look at on Shodan for Spark instances.
Oh snap!
Yeah, it's quite phenomenal, and those are the ones that are on default ports and have like their consoles open. They are quite very large instances. I'm talking like 34 terabytes of memory, 50,000 CPUs, like just hanging out in the open. And there's going back to that, things exist because people are generally good. Yeah.
I got one I can add to that. Actually, here's a perfect example. So like 8 years ago, ish, some people wrote a worm that used default passwords of routers to sort of spread itself, around the world.
Start with an M.
Yeah.
And they did a scan of the entire internet by divvying up the scan job amongst this botnet they made. And then when they did that, they backed out and closed everything down. Right? So like this was the Internet Census Project 2012, which I don't know if the page is still up, but they had a really excellent write-up about the whole process. Right? Now, is that technically illegal in lots of jurisdictions? Yeah, probably. Is the statute of limitations up? Yeah, mostly.
They didn't really cause harm.
We might.
Patriot Act. There's no statute of limitations on this shit anymore.
Yeah, well, but we might start hearing more sort of public information about that particular thing. But it's an example of like they did something that's like technically illegal, but it's kind of more of a prank. They like you didn't bother locking your door. They just kind of went in there and yelled out your window for 5 minutes and then left without taking anything.
Technically
It's
not
like
breaking and entering. If you don't close your door,
yeah,
it's not breaking and entering.
Yeah, but it's a different law with computers where it's like unauthorized access to a system, right?
No, you're right. I was just saying, like, if you leave your door wide open, it's not breaking and entering if somebody just walks in.
He's not a lawyer, kids, so. Don't.
People are pretty kind of trigger happy sometimes too. But
those IDSs go off pretty quick in Pennsylvania. Walking your door.
How does it go? Have your bits lost their bite? Give us a call at the Hacker Helpline. Area code 206-486-6272. That's once again 206-486-NARC with a C.
God.
Or send us an audio email at podcast@symbolcrash.com. All right. Well, I want to thank our guest, Josh Pitts. We will post a link to his GitHub page in the comment. And thanks to Vyrus and Dan for joining us, and Mitchell as always. So with that, now more than ever, hacking is not just a crime; it's a survival trade.